Good evening, good day to everyone. Welcome to our side event um, as part of the ongoing 25th session of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues entitled Strengthening Direct Partnerships and Financing for Indigenous Peoples-Led Renewable Energy Initiatives. I'm Roby Hanif. I'm from the Kalanguya and Kankana Indigenous Peoples in the Cordillera region in the Philippines, and I'm with the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous Peoples. This event is co-organized with Tonibong, with the United Nations Development Program, Green Empowerment, and Thousand Currents, and it will focus on the experience of Indigenous leaders and partner organizations in advancing Indigenous peoples-led renewable energy initiatives, with particular attention to what is needed to strengthen direct partnerships and financing pathways for Indigenous peoples. We will be having speakers from the Indigenous Clean Energy. It's an Indigenous-led institution, and we will also be hearing from our partners who's been supporting our work in advancing a truly just and sustainable energy transition for Indigenous peoples. I'll start the presentation by introducing the work of the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous peoples. Can we go to the next slide? So the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous Peoples was established in 2018. It is an Indigenous-led multi-stakeholder partnership that's dedicated to ensuring that the energy transition upholds Indigenous peoples' rights and the leadership of Indigenous peoples is recognized in the energy transition. Our target in relation to access to energy is to provide support for 50 million Indigenous peoples with renewable energy systems that's affordable and reliable. Next slide, please. These are the core partnership principles that we uphold. I won't be going through them one by one, but basically it's anchored to our collective rights as Indigenous peoples of self-determination, ensuring also that the leadership of Indigenous women, youth, and other marginalized sectors within our community are part of decision making and in the governance of renewable energy systems and the equitable benefit sharing. Next. And to implement our work, we have three core programs on access to energy, capacity building and knowledge exchange, and research and advocacy. Next. Now, this is a situation that we are in now. In the data from the World Energy Outlook in 2025, that World Energy Outlook 2025, there's still 730 million people living without electricity. But electrification is increasing in many countries, but even with the increase of electrification, 1.18 billion in a study, in a paper that was prepared under the World Bank, 1.18 billion people still experience energy poverty. They may have electricity, but they don't have affordable and reliable access to energy. That means some of them are only using electricity for a couple of hours a day. So they're still experiencing energy poverty. And with the lack of data disaggregation on ethnicity, we know that majority of the 730 million who still live without electricity and those still experiencing energy poverty are indigenous peoples who live in off-grid rural areas. Next. Now with this, in partnership with Indigenous Peoples' Rights International Business and Human Rights Resource Center, and also with UNDP subsequently in conducting dialogues, Indigenous peoples gathered at the global level to discuss not only the challenges that we're experiencing in the energy transition, but also showcase initiatives of Indigenous peoples in relation to renewable energy from small-scale mini-grid systems to utility-scale indigenous-led renewable energy systems. This global convening was able to come out with the position of indigenous peoples on the energy transition, but also a roadmap at the global level to be able to realize just and equitable transition for indigenous peoples. This was followed by a regional convening in Asia that highlighted the voices of indigenous women and youth. Next, um, in the energy transition and following from the declaration and roadmap from the global level, a roadmap was also developed at the regional level, capturing the context of Asia. The outcomes of these convenings and conferences were mainstreamed through dialogues that were conducted in partnership with UNDP and other UN agencies at the global and regional level. Now, from these roadmaps that were developed, this fed into the strategy of the right energy partnership with indigenous peoples. But even before that, we've already been starting partnerships with relevant UN agencies. Next slide, please. In 2018, we started a partnership with the UNDP GF Small Grants Program um, that provided renewable community-based renewable energy systems to 7 countries, Timor-Leste, Cambodia, Cameroon, Nepal, DRC, El Salvador, and Honduras. The second phase of the partnership did not include Honduras, but only with these 6 countries. Now, there were lessons learned in this partnership that we had with the UNDP, and while it responded to urgent needs of indigenous peoples, there's also a need to find or to strengthen pathways for direct partnership and direct access to financing for indigenous peoples that's long-term and flexible to ensure that it's to ensure ownership and sustainability of the systems. And the other partnership that we had in relation to access to energy, can you go back, is with IFAD under the adaptation for smallholder agriculture program. This partnership with IFAD was to showcase South-South Indigenous peoples exchange of skills and technology on renewable energy. So our partner in Malaysia, Ibong, supported 2 indigenous communities in Indonesia to be able to establish their mini hydro system, but also to set up their committees to govern the renewable energy system. Next. The photo that you see here right now is one of the projects that was implemented under the UNDP SGP program that provided access to clean water and sanitation for indigenous peoples that were displaced by a dam in Cambodia. Their new settlement didn't have access to clean water, and they had to travel far to be able to get water from the dam area, which is not safe health-wise and also security-wise for the women. So through the solar water pump, the new resettlement area of indigenous peoples was provided with the clean water that was very much needed. So this is just one example of the projects that were implemented under the UNDP SGP partnership. Next. And in our capacity building program, we aim to systematize it better to our indigenous peoples renewable energy pathfinders, where we look at establishing regional and local learning hubs. Last January, we actually just conducted a training of trainers in Asia. Um, for Indigenous peoples renewable energy practitioners, a follow-up to this would be country-level trainings that would strengthen and build a pool of trainers among Indigenous peoples renewable energy practitioners. We're also conducting trainings and virtual learning sessions on Indigenous peoples-led renewable energy initiatives and interlearning exchanges on experiences of Indigenous peoples in managing and governing their own renewable energy systems, as well as experiences on productive end use. Next. And part of the core of our work actually in the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous peoples is facilitating support for Indigenous peoples' renewable energy initiatives. And when we say support for these initiatives, we're not talking about the deployment of technology in communities. It has to be holistic and anchored in Indigenous peoples' leadership and self-determination. It has to support prior process before the deployment of the technology, the community strengthening, helping communities develop their protocols, their governance, including setting tariffs for the renewable energy systems. It also includes supporting trainings for local operators as well as productive end use. And ultimately, it also should provide support for the strengthening natural resource management, land tenure security, and territorial governance. Right now, financing is a big gap in relation to supporting a holistic support for Indigenous peoples-led renewable energy initiatives, and we encourage our partners and other actors to look into this, which is to look into a more holistic approach to supporting Indigenous peoples' renewable energy initiatives that's long-term, flexible, and its funding pathways that are urgently needed at the community, especially now with the energy crisis that we are facing. So with this, I now turn over to our speaker from Canada who will be sharing an actual experience that Indigenous peoples can um, lead the energy transition through a rights-based approach, whether it's small scale or utility scale. Indigenous peoples have been finding ways to address energy access within their communities, but also to advance energy sovereignty. Our first speaker is Freddie Hupe Campbell. I hope I pronounced that right, Freddie. She's the Director of Energy and Climate at Indigenous Clean Energy, based on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation in Ottawa, Canada. A proud Michif woman, originally from the Freddie. I may not be able to pronounce this properly, but from the Tinagsakin Basket territory in British Columbia. Freddie leads global and community-based. I hear an echo. Okay. Community-based clean energy initiatives grounded in the UND and the Sustainable Development Goals. Over to you, Freddie, to share the work that the Indigenous Clean Energy is doing, not only in Canada, but beyond Canada, in supporting Indigenous peoples in advancing energy sovereignty. Freddie?
Merci, Robbie. Tanse, Freddie P. Campbell, Dishnikashon, Ne Chinia Maka, Ni Geshchemala Lamachifi, Du Spiritu A1, Kakiwama Parenti. Hello, everyone. Good morning here. Good evening over there. Freddie P. Campbell, born and raised in the Kootenays and currently actually located in the Kootenays in the mountains. And I'm very grateful to be here with all my relations today, human and more than human kin. I'm a Michif Two-Spirit person and the director of Indigenous Clean Energy's national and global programming, as Robbie mentioned. If you could go to the next slide, please. Merci. Indigenous Clean Energy is a nonprofit organization. We support Indigenous nations nationally and globally in a variety of different ways. We also work with governments, utilities, different parts of the private sector, and anyone and everyone engaging with the energy sector, which is many, as we all know, there's many intersections. Next slide, please. These are some photos of some of our program participants. There's some medicines there, also acknowledging all of the beautiful medicines that come in and interact with us every day and come into this space. Yeah, there's some solar panels, wind. If you go to the next slide, please. It's just nice to show humans doing amazing work. Our end goal is to amplify, accelerate, and assert Indigenous sovereignty in the clean energy transition. And we do this through advocacy work, through capacity building, programming, and mentorship, and impactful program delivery. We also work really hard to amplify the incredible work happening across our country, but also around the world with Indigenous and community-led leadership in the energy transition. Next slide, please. Our organization has several programs where we work to train Indigenous people around renewable energy. We have our 2020 Catalyst program. We also train on energy efficiency and housing. We have 2 youth programs, one with career training and one that we support micro granting for Indigenous youth. We also have our global programming, our northern programming, and mentorship programming. Our organization, I'm sure similar to many of yours, and Robbie spoke to the amazing work that they do. We do our best to fill gaps and to support people where they're at. So that means often taking on or creating more programs. Next slide, please. These are just some examples of the things that our organization does. And please, anyone, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to connect anytime. But we do programs that are with and for Indigenous nations, and we change and adapt our programs annually. We work on project planning, community energy planning, and mapping. We do a ton of partnership work and pathfinding work as well. We work to uphold UNDRIP and different acts within it, such as free, prior, and informed consent. A lot of community engagement and relationship building work, and we're always working to ensure equity, accessibility, and intergenerational supports. Next slide, please. Throughout the past 20 years, I would say, Indigenous-led clean energy projects in what is known as Canada have accelerated exponentially. This map is, I think, about 3 years old now. I just like to use it to show the diversity of projects that are Indigenous owned or co-owned across the country. Indigenous nations are now the second largest asset owners of renewable energy projects, next to Crown and utility corporations here, which is immense. And this is due to a lot of hard work that communities have put forward. It was grounded in resistance, and it has come to a point of re-existence in many ways. And so this shows just the hundreds of small to large scale projects that there are across the country. There's hydro, wind, solar, transmission projects, energy efficiency projects, community scale housing projects, and much more. Sorry, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. This is the Okakendat Hydro Project, or the Dokis Nation First Nation project in the eastern region of the country. You can find this online, actually, and I wanted to show it because we did a case study with the Business Human Rights organization on it. I'll just put it in the chat. But this is a 10 megawatt project that the nation built off an already existing run-of-the-river project that was not done with consent from the community, or any form of rights were not upheld. So the nation came up with this 10 megawatt project, also as a project to reintroduce salmon species back into their community, because that was lost with the dam that was originally there. Some highlights would be impact benefit agreement or community benefit agreement. This was a tool that was used in negotiation and upholding of rights and impacts within the nation. There was a ton of capacity building for this project. Actually, the jobs, I think, was 101% throughout the project, and after the project, it was 90%. of job creation and retention for the community. There were also changing of standards and regulations around land and water rights for this project that were really important. So if you want to read more, you can check out the case study or connect with the nation. Next slide, please. I also wanted to highlight a smaller community scale project that turned into a larger project, which is also another model that's been used commonly across the country. Jana started this solar project in her community to focus on food sovereignty, and that has transpired into a project that she's doing for her master's, which is providing energy efficient housing for her community. So she's expanded from food sovereignty and doing a greenhouse project into a larger housing project for her community. Next slide, please. We also have global programming, and this programming is grounded in the relationships that we build with our kin. So we've done work in so-called Australia, in Aotearoa, Colombia, Ecuador. We also have a variety of partners in other parts of the world that we're doing workshops and capacity building training virtually when we can, like in Mexico, and have done some work supporting folks in Argentina as well. And this programming has really shown that taking an approach that is co-development and co-design that's grounded in community is something that has immense impacts. Our organization is here to share as much as we can and what we've learned, but not to impose practices or information in other parts of the world. Our job is to support our kin in solidarity in that. And so that's the approach that we've taken. And we've been able to co-create capacity building programs with other local organizations in the countries that I mentioned. Next slide, please. This is a model, and I want to show it here in English and Spanish, and also happy if there are other languages that folks want to translate this into. But energy sovereignty is at the heart of all of our work, and these are some of the main pillars and all of the rippling impacts that happen when projects are done at the community level. We have overwhelming evidence that Indigenous-led projects are more sustainable, more beneficial for society, more economically viable, risk averse, and many more. So this kind of highlights that. Next slide, please. Next. Oh, thank you. These are a few resources I wanted to highlight, things that also our organization can share with other organizations and communities, like a project kind of checklist, or we have an equity guide that we just published on our website on indigenouscleanenergy.com. These are all free resources. We also do a lot of resource creation or co-creation, and we're happy to share that with folks too. Just around project experiences. There's so many to draw from, and we've been very lucky and grateful that a lot of nations have been willing to share information with other nations and the public. So this is that. Next slide, please. This is our social media. Folks want to follow. Our communications team is amazing. We've also got a podcast where we featured a lot of global stories from around the world, called Decolonizing Power. I think there's just one more slide. Yes, so this is our ICE network. We call it our Indigenous Clean Energy Facebook. Please feel free to sign on. It is free. A lot of resources are shared there and a lot of different updates. But the last thing I just want to mention is that it is very possible to do things in a different way, to do things that are Indigenous-led and community-led. And the energy sector has extracted resources and labor for decades, and it is continuing to do so in this current transition. And Indigenous nations and communities around the world need to be at the center and at the forefront of this transition, because Indigenous nations know how to sustain and protect the lands that we have for so long. And so I hope that if folks want to connect with us and hear more about what has happened here, but what is continuing to happen all across the world, we'd be really happy to share. Merci.
Thank you, Freddie, for sharing the amazing work that you do, not only within Canada but also beyond, especially in the countries that you mentioned. And we just want to highlight that it's important co-development and co-design with Indigenous peoples in relation to renewable energy projects is important because it ensures greater impact, ownership, and sustainability of initiatives that are being implemented, and that Indigenous peoples can indeed lead a sustainable and just energy transition. So, after hearing from the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous peoples and from the Indigenous Clean Energy, we're also going to hear from our three panelists, our partners who's been supporting work on community-based renewable energy, particularly those that are initiated by Indigenous peoples. So we have in the panel Terence. Hi, Eddie, from the program advisor with the United Nations Development Program Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. We also have Rachel Arini, who's the Pacific Program Manager of Thousand Currents, and we have Gio Cornebi, the Asia Program Director at Green Empowerment. So for Terence, Rachel, and Gio, it would be good to also, after hearing from us, it would be good to hear from you the experiences of your institutions in engaging and supporting Indigenous peoples, particularly uh, on renewable energy initiatives. So I'll start off with Terence to talk about the work of the UNDP on this aspect.
You, Roby, for the opportunity to join today. It's a great honor to be with all of you. So Roby presented the partnership between the UNDP-GEF Small Grants Program and the Indigenous Peoples Right Energy Partnership earlier in the 7 countries. This builds on the work of the SGP over the last 32 years in providing grant-based finance to uh, NGOs, CBOs, Indigenous peoples in more than 120 countries. I'll put in the chat some of the background on that work, but most of historically of the work with Indigenous peoples has been around biodiversity. So the work with the REP was really an opportunity to explore access to energy and the potential to focus more on this particular aspect, which would be covered through the work with the Global Environment Facility under the climate change focal area. So it was particularly gratifying to see the work with Tony Bung in Malaysia become a foundational reference in the microhydro space, and the expansion of that particular partnership with the training center that Roby referred to, and also the additional other donors and partners, including EFAD, that have been able to support the South-South learning. So as Roby mentioned, 2 years ago here at the UN Permanent Forum, the roadmap, which was developed around what to do next around Indigenous people's access to energy, is an important reference for us in UNDP as we focus on uh, a range of support to governments on their nationally determined contributions, including the just transition. So I think one of the questions that was raised 2 years ago in the Permanent Forum, we heard from cases from Australia, from also from Canada, and Freddie, thank you for that very inspiring presentation, which shows this growth in Canada of partnerships with Indigenous peoples around access to energy. And I think the question of scale and finance for Indigenous-led energy projects is something which, as UNDP, we need to think a lot more about. So the cases that were presented at the conference at the UN Permanent Forum 2 years ago looked at a combination of grant-based technical assistance, which is the space that we in the Small Grants Program have traditionally occupied, but uh, what are the opportunities to maybe de-risk other forms of finance? So I would say that looking forwards, the types of learnings and exchange that Freddie presented across regions, respectful partnerships between Indigenous peoples is something that we need to focus on. And just to give you an update, yesterday here at the Permanent Forum, the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, hosted an event on the next GEF 9 replenishment cycle. And the decision now for the GEF 9 is for there to be a 20% earmarking or target for funding for Indigenous peoples and local communities. So there could be a lot of potential, I think, for programming in this space on components in climate change mitigation projects and territorial projects along the holistic approach that we heard about to explore the just transition dimensions of finance to Indigenous peoples. So we really look forward to building on the previous collaboration in the 7 countries and seeing in the next 4 years how we can build on that and potentially maybe also work with Indigenous peoples in Canada and other countries that have the experience that we heard about. So thank you very much, Roby, and we look forward to further collaboration. Back to you.
Thank you, Terence, and thank you also for the update on the earmarking of funds from the GEF. And we look forward to also see the same the uh, from the Green Climate Fund, no? And also the continuing partnership with UNDP on community-based renewable energy in countries where UNDP is working with. We now turn over to Rachel Arini of Thousand Currents, who will be discussing also their experiences, but also their perspectives on how to strengthen financing for Indigenous peoples' renewable energy initiatives. Rachel,
Yeah.
over to you.
Hi, Ate Robbie. How are you? Thank you so much for the opportunity and allowing me to join these important discussions. Hi, everyone. So I speak today on behalf of Thousand Currents. We are not very familiar name, perhaps for most of you, but we are a movement-aligned funders that has partnered with Indigenous people, smallholder farmers, women, and grassroots communities to advance agroecology, food sovereignty, stewardship of commons as the foundation of just and resilient society for the past 40 years. So actually, energy democracy issues is new areas for us. Robbie here and also Bunny and Alice are the one that have introduced the significance of the topics and the importance for Thousand Currents to focus on that. That's why we are currently move resources directly to Indigenous people and grassroots movements to build community-led renewables energy as pathways to achieve energy democracy. So my points today will be focusing on the reflections of our current partnerships with Tony Boong, RFP, and also other partners globally, and also our message for fellow funders, UN multilateral, in navigating current context and try to double down direct resources for Indigenous communities. So I think it's very fitting to talk about the context that we are currently living, which has a very distinct color of profound volatility that are affecting access to energy, while climate disasters repeatedly knock out centralized grid. So in every crisis, it is very clear it is indigenous people and rural communities who are first to lose access to electricity, health services, safe water, and last to be reconnected. But throughout our partnerships with our partner, we've learned that the instability is not a glitch in the system because it is built into the energy model that concentrates power in very few hands and treats indigenous territories as sacrifice zones for fossil fuels and other mineral extractions. So our energy democracy strategy starts from very different horizon because we think that decentralized community-owned renewable energy led by indigenous nations, indigenous movement is not only fairer, it is more resilient, more effective, and fully scalable as a solution for all. So it's very resonated with what Freddie has mentioned earlier. And we also co-create our strategy on energy democracy with our partners. It's really centering democratic ownerships and participatory governance. So we insist that the goal is not merely an energy transitions from fossil to renewable, but a just transitions that dismantle racism, patriarchy, colonialism within the current very centralized and top-down energy systems. And I think another reflections that we have from Tony Boong, RFP, and other indigenous communities across Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar is that we've witnessed the incredible agency and technical skills of indigenous engineers who are designing, installing, and maintaining micro hydro and other type of technology in remote indigenous territories. And what we have learned is very clear. Indigenous leaderships itself is the secret sauce of sustainability of community-led renewable energy. When the system is conceived, built, and governed by the community, when it's rooted in indigenous knowledge, it is less. And those experiences have really shifted our own understanding that energy transition itself is not the end goal. It's only a tool, one tool among others to achieve social justice, indigenous sovereignty, and community well-being. So what we want to share with other funders, UN and bilateral donors is that now is the momentous time to really double down on direct resources to indigenous-led renewable energy initiatives. And as Robbie mentions about the financing gap, most climate and energy finance still flows through very top-down channels. Large INGOs, corporations, development banks with standards and risk frameworks that effectively exclude grassroots and indigenous organizations. Our strategy explicitly responds to this very gap. We commit to direct, flexible financing to community-led initiatives and movement-led initiatives. We even supported movement-led pool funds such as the Nusantara Fund in Indonesia that sit close to indigenous movement and can resource everything from households, solars, and community microgrids to local government transitions. And we pair this direct support to indigenous groups and community with trust-based grant making. What we mean by trust-based grant making is we really simplify the applications and reporting process. We centering relationships and accountability to communities rather than donors, and recognizing that indigenous partners are expert in both technical and political aspect of energy transitions. This is part of our broader commitment to decolonize funding practices and to really treat financing as a tool for power shifting. And some specific areas that we've supported, not only in Asia Pacific but also Latin America and Africa, is that we provide direct funding for indigenous communities to do lighthouse projects, which is a community energy initiatives that serve as a practical models and learning hubs. We also support partners' work in doing political and energy literacy educations. We also resourcing cross-movement organizing that links energy democracy to agroecology, debt justice, digital sovereignty, and recognizing these struggles as inseparable. We also continuing challenging extractivism, including critical mineral mining and the expansions of energy-intensive AI data centers, and supporting community resistance as essential climate actions. However, in still on the topics of financial gap, there are several structural barriers that keep indigenous communities from receiving direct support that they need. Some of the funders and even bilateral and multilateral financing structures are still perceived communities' initiatives are too small, too slow, or not technically enough, although Freddie's presentations have shown that it's only a myth. While their proven efficiencies, impact, and social empowerment are often overlooked. And majority of the funding, I think, as Robbie also has mentioned, rarely covers the full ecosystem of work. Because mostly it's project based. So the work on territorial defense, strengthening internal governance, feminist leaderships, open knowledge sharing that makes technical projects sustainable has not been able to be supported by this available funding. So we are recognizing this challenge and opening an invitations to other funders to also think of collective practical shift to be able to provide trust-based and direct funding to the indigenous communities. And as a closing, I mean, in every region we work, indigenous communities are already showing that decentralized community-led renewable energy can really hold communities together through crisis and create pathways towards health, dignity, and self-determinations. So they've been proving that energy transitions that are democratic, feminist, and decolonial are not only possible, but the most resilient solutions we have. So my invitations really to fellow funders, the governments, the multilateral agency is very simple. So let us move money closer to indigenous communities and let us share decision-making power to ensure that financing architecture serve indigenous self-determinations and community well-being rather than reproducing the very system we are here to transform. So thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing not only the work but the principles of Thousand Currents promotes and that strong call for a systems change and shifting the power to the people. Now, our last speaker, we have Gio from Green Empowerment. Gio, over to you.
Thanks, Robbie. Hi, everyone. Magandang umaga. Good morning to all, and good evening from the Philippines. My name is Gio Cornby. I'm the Asia Program Director at Green Empowerment. And Green Empowerment is a US-based organization, and our mission is to work with in-country partners to build clean water and renewable energy infrastructure in rural communities across the globe. I personally like to use the term support organization. We follow the lead of locally rooted Indigenous-led partners who are the real experts on the ground. So we come in where they ask for support, whether that's technical support, research and development, fundraising, and sometimes we have the support at the ready, but often we figure things out together. As an organization, we've been working with Indigenous-led partners for 27 years now. And today, what I want to share is what we've learned about how support organizations like ours can genuinely let Indigenous partners lead, and what funding structures make that possible. Our work spans Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Over to the next slide is a map. I'll focus today on lessons from our work in Sabah, Malaysia. And I'd like to ground these lessons so that we could touch and concretize them and replicate them. So I'll draw from our experience with our partners, including Tony Bong, who is with us today and have been referenced a lot. We've been journeying together for 25 years and now attempting to reach 400 all unelectrified Indigenous villages in Sabah with community-owned renewable energy systems. The program is called the Sabah RE2 Roadmap. So I'll drop the link there. And in 2025, we received a 4-year grant from the Eco Energy Climate Fund to accelerate community-managed solar PV mini-grids. It amounts to $1.4 million, the largest our consortium of organizations have received. And I will draw from this experience when I speak about trust-based funding. So again, so that we can touch the quick lessons in the next 5 minutes. Now, in the next slide, I reflect on how to be a good support organization. The first principle in my mind is really that communities always come first. And what this means is knowing our role as a support organization in the sphere of influence in decision-making on projects. If the goal is community resilience, climate justice, human-centered energy transition, it follows that the primary source of instruction and how this can be done is the community, followed by Indigenous-led organizations that represent them, and only after that, support organizations, regional or global. And our role is precisely that, to support, to amplify, to resource, not to design, not to decide or direct. Other lessons learned in the next slide follows from the first. The second principle that I've got here is Indigenous partners lead the future. And what this means is really the hard work of working toward not being needed anymore. And what this looks like in practice is focusing on transferring resources, funding networks, not just the tools, not just capacity, but building lasting institutional capacity. And going back to the concrete example in our Eco Energy grant that's stewarded by Green Empowerment, our lead implementing partner, Tony Bong, has a direct line of communication with Eco Energy so that they can access these opportunities directly in the future. They're the ones in the spotlight. And in all of this, Green Empowerment is consciously working toward a future where we're no longer needed. And when that happens, we will celebrate. And third, mind the budget. Like, budgets are real, they're a point of tension, but they have to be developed with partners. We work to maximize the share of every grant that flows directly to partners and communities. And to be able to touch that, we're talking between 85% to 90% to 100% of grant funds going straight to partners, depending on what role they want us to play. And essentially, when we say Indigenous-led projects, it has to show up in the numbers, plain and simple. Finally, be self-critical. We constantly ask ourselves where we're adding value. And we've learned to be proactive in backing off where we're not needed and to always sit in the discomfort of always asking that question. I'd like to close with what trust-based funding looks like in practice. And I bring back the concrete example for work with Eco Energy Climate Fund. Just for background, they're an eco-label that allocates 0.10 euros to a climate fund for every megawatt hour of eco-energy labeled energy sold. And these funds finance new renewable energy projects focused on first-time access. And the first thing is, in our projects, they put value on last mile contacts. They didn't like back off and say that's too expensive, instead of seeing a project as that as expensive, because infrastructure is expensive, especially last mile realities. They recognize the co-benefits that Indigenous communities are building a lifetime of energy access, powering their livelihoods, their education, their health and food security, co-benefits in community-led conservation, preservation of cultural heritage as communities stay in their ancestral lands, and livelihood programs so that communities can decide for themselves what they'd like to use their energy for. Focusing on achieving results and trust-based reporting, what I liked about this experience is that Green Empowerment and our Indigenous-led partners were evaluated based on our past results and projects delivered, not policies, formal structures, box-ticking exercises that have less to do with whether a project succeeds. The other thing that was a positive experience that worked well for Indigenous-led partners was that we were first awarded funding through their small grants program. And upon successful delivery, it ramped up to a larger long-term multi-year funding based on results. Last one, full flexibility speaks for itself. Partner-defined templates in our applications, budgets, and reporting, and leeway to adjust budgets and timelines based on on-the-ground realities. And the most important one is being able to do assessments when funding comes in, rather than leaving that at the risk of local partners. Multi-year funds, multi-year grants also self-explanatory, predictable and sustained, and nourishing long-term relationships with community partners. These are our lessons. We don't do this perfectly. We're still learning. So if you'd like to trade lessons learned, learn together, I'm very happy to connect. Thank you for listening. We continue to listen, learn, and adapt together. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gio, and it's heartening to hear, no, from because as we build our perspectives on our call for direct access to financing for Indigenous peoples, it's heartening to hear from support groups, from philanthropy partners, from partners in the UN agencies on how that is being visualized and operationalized within your institutions. And most of actually a majority of it aligns to what we are also pushing for in our call for direct access to financing. So after hearing from the speakers, I encourage the participants in the audience, if you have questions, to me, to Freddie, to Terence, Rachel, or Gio, do raise your hands, or you can also type your question in the chat box. For those joining us in the live stream in Facebook, we're monitoring that. So if you also have questions, do type your questions in the comment box. Anyone who would like to ask a question? The participants are quiet. But maybe Freddie, while we're waiting for the other participant, for the audience, for questions they may have, because as was it Gio or was it Rachel who was saying a while ago that most often Indigenous peoples-led renewable energy initiatives are being looked at as too slow and too small, and not investment worthy, no. Maybe it would be good to hear your reflections also after hearing from Terence, Rachel, and Gio, how Indigenous peoples' renewable energy initiatives can also scale up, not only on impact to territories but also to utility scale services.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question, Robbie. I think firstly, these types of projects should be slow. They should take time. I think we have thousands of examples in the fossil fuel industry showing what happens when projects are done at a rapid pace without community buy-in and community inclusion, and that has led to devastating impacts in numerous areas, to people, to planet, to species. And so I think the idea of projects taking time is an important one to talk about, but it should take time, as many of the presenters mentioned, to develop those good partnerships. This work should be about relationality. It should be about relating to one another, relating to the land, and working through things in that way. And so in this country, I think it has been exemplified that there's opportunities to take that time to build the relationships. In project development, construction takes the least amount of time. It's the pre-feasibility work, the feasibility work, going through all of the agreements, doing the land monitoring. There's so many different layers to it. And so that has to be done right in order to reach all of these incredible benefits. But doing that, especially in renewable energy, means that there's that long-term viability for the project, means that it can be maintained by the community, maintained longer, that the risk is reduced generally, that the economics are there and proven. So I think that approach has allowed projects to be incredibly successful here.
Thank you, Freddie. And as Adrian is here, based on their experience also in Tunibo, 90% of the work is really on community strengthening, organizing the community, strengthening the institutions, strengthening the capacities to be able to govern not only the renewable energy system, but more importantly, their territories and natural resources. So we have a couple of questions that came in. I'll also be calling you Kanbay in a while. But in the chat box, we have a question on the rules for commercial banks or institutional investors to provide financial resources. And there's a specific question for Geo on the project in Myanmar, where it has been implemented and if the conflict had any impact on the implementation. But before I give it to the speakers, I hope you're all okay to extend at least until 9:10. I give it to Kanbay for your question. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is my just comment rather than question. Yes, it is very important, the renewable energy. In our case, in Mongolia, we have small grant projects, UNDP, and we're working with pastoral communities to bring renewable energy, like solar panels, with quoting of milk and dairy products. So that kind of things is very important in communities. And also is helping to sustainable use of common resources like rangelands. In our cases, like 2 communities, they increase livelihood, they increase income by selling the milk or dairy products. Then it brings them possibility to reduce the animal numbers, to adjust the animal numbers with carrying capacity of rangelands, pastoralists. In other cases in Western Mongolia, the women-led group, they very much introduced ways how to improve livelihood, because they before never sell market dairy products or milk, because the tradition is they not allowed to sell something like rather than just giving the gift. So after introduction of the project, now the community's livelihood improved, and everyone now is transferred from just own consumption to marketing of milk and dairy products. That I think it's gives to us more, and then we're trying to use this kind of things. We want now to bring this kind of case studies to do the UN COP17 in Ulaanbaatar. How we can, like renewable energy, clean energy, can support common resource management, because this is more important in the case of reducing desertification, or adaptation to climate change, local communities. So that kind of things, I think, in our cases, in common resource, very important. So we want to set, be very happy. I'm very happy to learn your experiences in countries. I think it is a good idea. So my just comment, no questions. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you, Kanbai, and it's good to hear the experience of Mongolia in implementing the SGP project, and would also be good to know because usually when we talk about productive end use, it's usually a challenge to access markets. And from your experience in Mongolia, there's access to market in relation to the production of milk. The documentation of that experience would be important as well as we continue to share lessons learned on our experiences. But over to you, over to the panel speakers. There's another question here in the comment box on the protocol in engaging with Indigenous peoples in renewable energy that was developed. So I'll start with Terence. Any of the speakers can answer the question also on the role of banks and investors in providing financial resources. So Terence, and then Gio, Rachel, and then Freddie.
Thank you, Roby and Ikan Bai. So good to see you again. Just this afternoon here at the Permanent Forum, we will have a side event with the government of Mongolia preparing for the COP17, where we'll be hearing from different pastoralist organizations about their territorial planning. In SGP, we've supported outside of Mongolia other pastoralist groups in terms of their energy solutions with the Bororo pastoralists in Cameroon and other places around those value chains. So I think as we plan for the COP17 in Mongolia in August, we should really think about mobile peoples and their energy needs, which are distinct and maybe different from sedentary populations, and think work that through. There's a question from Manja about protocols in engaging IPs and renewable energy projects. Yesterday, Mirna Cunningham from Pawanka Fund presented the draft protocol on rebalancing relationships in terms of direct access to finance. I understand this will be discussed at the London Climate Week and with an objective to share that with donors and partners working with Indigenous peoples. And then just quickly on the question of banks and institutional investors, as UNDP, we are focused on grant-based finance, but there's a lot of interest to see how to partner with other entities that can de-risk loan guarantees and including the UN Capital Development Fund. So it's something that UNDP is looking at in terms of leveraging the grant-based resources to do more to attract other forms of finance. Over.
Thank you, Terence. Gio, for the question in Myanmar, and you may want to answer the other questions.
Thanks, Robbie. The project, the last project we did in Myanmar was way back in 2023. Now we provide fiscal sponsorship support to our partners, meaning they don't really need us to do anything else beyond that. So the work in 2023 was in Karen State, and the project was led by our local partner, BGET, and they led the installation of solar PV systems across 8 mobile clinics. And they did face challenges related to the conflict, solar panels risking confiscation, bombings happening in some of the clinics. And it was the way they navigated that was really leaning on local community strength. So it was the medical staff who worked their way around it, traveled around conflict areas so everyone can congregate and get renewable energy training, training on maintenance, from installation to maintenance and operations, and then lead the installations within those 8 clinics. A quick comment on
Can I, yeah,
Yeah.
Just a quick reply. This is so interesting. I'm from Kisan. So Kisan works in current state. So we are Karen Environmental Social Action Network. So and we actually now together with Thousand Current exploring the way to also run renewable energy projects. And we been communicating with the Border Green Energy team, the one that you supported before. They provide their technical expertise for our teams. So that would be very interesting to learn more about your experience and connect. So, because yeah, very curious about how the conflict affected, and yeah, we're still trying to do and rolling out the work, renewable energy work, despite the conflict. So, it was very interesting to learn about your experience. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we can connect later more. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Lena. Yes, happy to connect later.
Rachel,
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, Freddie, for the remarks on we should also provide counter narrative that everything needs to be happen in a fast pace. I think that's one of our main homework, especially in educating and influencing donor practices on what we mean by quote unquote like success in community-led renewable energy, including the indigenous centrality of it. Yeah, so I think this is also very linked with the questions from Manja Bayang on like protocols on engaging with indigenous people. I'm sure like colleagues here are the experts to answer that. Our EP, Tony Boong, Kesan, of course, have like protocols which really centering community indigenous community self-determinations and also FPIC when kickstarting the initiatives, the collective management of it, and also like any decisions regarding the energy initiatives that they have. And I think like on the questions about like the role of investors and banking, we also need to looking at how we can influencing them to also implement like trust-based modality that focus on the relationship building with the indigenous communities, because what we've learned from our partners is that there is very direct correlations between that injustice with setting up the renewable energy in the community. So often, community have to suffer because of the indebtedness, and that's hinder the success and usefulness of renewable energy that they have in their community. So I think there's need to be like more deep work on that to looking at what's alternative of financing mechanism that is viable, but also centering the element of justice. And we are very keen to learn about that from our partners, including the group of economists in Indonesia named Celios, and also the Philippines movement for climate justice that currently work on that matter. So I'm happy to also share it with RIP and other folks here when their work result is ready to be publicized. So I think I'll stop here and give the floor back to Robbie. Thank you.
thank you, Rachel, and Freddie.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. I put it in the chat, but I just wanted to note that blended financing models have been very successful with projects here. I do think that commercial and institutional investors play a large role in this space, especially during such tumultuous political times across the world, when historically here, a lot of funding Indigenous nations received for clean energy projects was through the government. We had a variety of projects and programs that were specifically focused on Indigenous renewable energy projects, and things have shifted now, and we're not sure where we're going to be. But in addition to that, I think that private financing does offer more flexibility, as many of the speakers have mentioned, and ensuring that there are specific models taken for Indigenous and community level projects is important too. Things like lower interest rates due to inequity that exists currently, non-repayable loans, as Terrence did mention as well, and ensuring communities are supported throughout the process. And as Rochelle mentioned, ensuring that free, prior, and informed consent or other human rights or environmental-based standards are implemented into this work is critical too. See.
Thank you, Freddie, and thank you to all the speakers. Just to close up and also to respond to the last question on how you measure whether awareness or education efforts are actually helping people from interest, moving from interest to action, no? From the experience of the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous people, so from the global and regional convenings where there's actually really a lot of interest from Indigenous peoples to not only look at the challenges but manage their own renewable energy initiatives. We've now started the regional learning hubs. As I mentioned earlier, we started the regional training of trainers for Asia, and there are Indigenous peoples renewable energy pathfinders program. And in partnership with UN Women, we'll be doing a follow-up training in Nepal with one of the training participants from our regional training for the solar water pump irrigation project that they are implementing. And it's an Indigenous women's organization. It's a Tharu Women's Upliftment Center organization in Nepal. And they want to be more active actors in the renewable energy system and not having to rely with external engineers to do the troubleshooting for them. So that's the kind of um, training, follow-up training that will be done at the country level. Also, as an offshoot of the training, participants of the training were able to submit a proposal to Honnold Foundation for solar power projects. Unfortunately, only one in Cambodia was accepted, but that's okay. No, it's they already have a document that they can also use for fundraising with other potential donors. But these are the follow-ups that are being done from trainings to really doing actual work on the ground and ensuring that the learnings are brought down to the community level, but also it's being shared. So with the continuous interlearning exchanges that we will be conducting, we hope to ensure that these learnings that we have from different experiences of implementation are shared with the wider Indigenous peoples movements, not only in Asia, but also in Africa, in Latin America, and our Indigenous brothers and sisters in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand who also have extensive experience on this aspect. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending our virtual side event. We actually have our second session of our monthly webinar on Indigenous-led renewable energy initiatives next week. An invitation will also be sent out to you. We will be featuring the micro hydropower system project of Sintang, Indonesia, where the community organized themselves as a credit union and accessed a grant that was repayable. And they're still managing the system 15 years, for 15 years now. So we'll be sending that invitation to everyone, and we hope we continue the conversation and the partnerships with you. Lena, it would be good to hear also the work of Kesan in Myanmar on renewable energy. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day and hope to see you in person someday, Freddie.
Too.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Thanks, Robbie.